Welcome back. Juan Manuel Santos has won the re-election in Colombia after the tightest presidential contest in years. Many believe it was an endorsement of his efforts to end conflict with the FARC guerrillas, with peace talks now in its 18th month. Santos took 53% of the vote, while 47% cast ballots for right-wing challenger Oscar Ivan Zuluaga. Our political analyst Laura Carlsen joins us in the studio to discuss the results. Laura, welcome to the show. At one point, Zuluaga was ahead in the polls. This election went to a runoff. So what happened here?
That's right. It was a surprise in many ways. But what happened, a lot of it had to do with the abstention. We're talking about 60% abstention in the first round, which is really historic for Colombia, and was an indication that a lot of voters were just not convinced by either candidate. But what happened in the second round is a lot of those did go to the polls, and they ended up voting for Santos. The other thing was that Santos was able to form more of a coalition. And the main reason for this was that there were a lot of people on the left, especially, who are involved in the peace process. They really believe in these peace talks. And the vote came down to a referendum on the peace talks, because Zuluaga was very clear that there would be conditions to the point where it was very probable that the peace talks would break down. So people went to the polls and they voted for the peace talks, and in the course of that, voted for Santos.
Well, I want to get to the peace talks in just a moment, but there are those that believe that Zuluaga was handpicked by former President Álvaro Uribe. So what did that play, if anything, in this election?
That was pretty clear. Many people, in fact, considered him a puppet of the Uribe forces because he plays a very strong role in Colombian politics still, and in fact will be a member of the Senate. So there were two impacts for that. The first one was positive in the sense that Zuluaga is not a candidate who could have on his own built up the force that he did with almost 7 million votes in Colombia. And having Uribe and his experience and his political know-how and force and resources and everything behind him was a big factor in him getting as close as he did to the presidency. But the other factor was negative in the sense that, again, Uribe is known to be against the peace process, and in the end, the Colombian people are just plain tired of it. They're powerful forces against peace, and they're tired of the war, and they decided to vote for an option that keeps those peace negotiations going.
So that being said, and with Santos back, does that mean that the FARC peace process is a done deal?
No, not at all. It's much more difficult than that. It's a good sign that even though it's taken a long time, as you mentioned, 18 months, we've gone through 26 rounds, and some really difficult issues have actually been worked out, including agrarian reform, political participation. There's still, of course, some difficult issues that are on the boards right now. They're looking at victims and impunity, the question of whether war crimes will be tried or not. And those are always extremely difficult in any peace process. But there's already been a declaration this month coming out about this latest round, which indicates that both sides are in agreement on some of the most important points. So there's a lot of optimism, and there's a lot of expectations in Colombia, and not just in Colombia, but around the whole region, that this will go through and it can be done.
But almost half of the voters wanted to go with the other guy. So what will Santos have to do to bring the country together? What is the most pressing issue on his agenda right now?
Well, that's true. The country is very divided, and there's also still this huge chunk of population that didn't vote and that's not totally convinced about the Santos presidency. So what he'll have to do is show some results. He's talking unity right now, but it's very unlikely that the Uribe forces are going to be in any mood for reconciliation. In fact, former President Uribe on his Twitter account is launching attacks against Santos. He's claiming fraud in the elections. And attacking even the Organization of American States for being observers and legitimizing these elections. So he's clearly not in any mood to negotiate a coalition government in any way, shape, or form. So what Santos is going to have to do is put a lot of effort into the peace talks, because that's where people are going to be looking for results. Now, he's still going to have huge challenges in front of him. There's 6 million displaced people in Colombia. They don't have livelihoods. Their homes have been disrupted, their families. There's a huge toll in terms of the dead after so many years of civil war. He has to bring that together. And the other part of it is that peace is not just the peace talks. There are a lot of forms of conflict that will continue even if the peace process goes through. And they have to do with this model of economic development where there's so many people that are left outside. That's why we see these huge strikes in the agricultural sector since the free trade agreement. So all of those issues will have to move forward parallel to the peace talks and will be an additional challenge on top of that.
All right, Laura Carlsen, we appreciate your time and your insight as always. Thank you so much for joining us here on America's Now.
Coming up.
A hockey player that wants to end poverty in a northern city of Argentina.
Right now in Argentina, we lack that identity. We lack that trust for each other. But we need that. We need one another to build something better.
America's Now.